His name was Walter Grayson. At 67, he woke up before sunrise, not because he had somewhere to go, but because his body no longer knew how to sleep in. The old wooden house in a quiet Ohio suburb creaked softly, as if it remembered more than Walter himself wanted to. The kitchen smelled of yesterday's coffee, old books, and time. A clock hung on the wall, always 5 minutes slow. Walter never fixed it. It felt like time treated him more gently that way. He had been a teacher. Once. A teacher not everyone remembered, but those who did remembered him for a long time. Walter slowly sat down at the table, placed his palms on the worn surface, and stared at his hands. They were spotted now, veins raised beneath thin skin. But once, these hands held chalk, checked notebooks, marked mistakes in red ink, mistakes that once felt more important than life itself. He used to believe that knowledge could save a person. His childhood was neither happy nor tragic. It was quiet. Walter grew up in a small town where everyone knew each other so well that no one asked how you were doing. His father worked at a factory. His mother worked at a library. It was there, among dust and silence, that Walter learned to listen to the world through words. Books became his first real friends. They didn't shout. They didn't betray. They didn't laugh at dreams. They were simply there. And Walter decided that if he could give that feeling to others, his life would have meaning. He became a literature teacher at a public school. Not because it was prestigious, but because he saw no other way to live. In the early years, he walked into the classroom with a heart full of hope. He believed in every student. Even the ones sitting in the back row pretending not to care. Especially them. He remembered every name. He remembered the looks students gave him, sometimes bored, sometimes defiant, and sometimes with that rare spark that keeps a teacher awake at night preparing lessons. Walter was never strict. He wasn't feared because he yelled, but because he stayed silent. When the class grew loud, he would simply stop talking and look at them. Slowly, the noise faded. The students felt that this man expected more from them. Years passed. Students changed. The world changed faster than the curriculum. The school began demanding reports, numbers, test results. Less talk about meaning. More about statistics. Walter aged along with the blackboard, which grew darker every year from words written and erased. He married late. Her name was Elizabeth. She understood his silences and never demanded explanations. They lived modestly but peacefully. They never had children, and Walter told himself that his students were his children. Life doesn't like it when people are too certain of their explanations. Elizabeth left quietly, the same way she had lived. After that, the house became larger than it really was. The rooms filled with echoes of things that were never said. Walter continued teaching for a few more years. Without the spark. More out of duty than belief. New teachers arrived with tablets, new language, a faster rhythm. He felt himself becoming part of the past, something no one rushed to remember. His last day at school was ordinary. No speeches. No flowers. He returned his keys, picked up a box of books, and walked out without looking back. And now, sitting at the kitchen table, Walter Grayson wasn't thinking about what he had done wrong. He was thinking about those he hadn't managed to hear. Outside, the sun was rising, and the world kept living without him. But somewhere deep inside, he felt it. His story wasn't over yet. He just didn't know what would make it continue. Walter stood up from his chair and slowly approached the window. Outside, a young family was walking their dog, someone hurriedly climbed into a car, someone laughed, not realizing that behind this window stood a man who had spent his whole life listening to others but now didn't know who to speak to. He hadn't truly spoken to anyone in a long time. Since retirement, the days had blended into one long, stretched-out silence. Morning, coffee, a book, a walk to the store, dinner, sleep. And again. People would ask, "How's retirement?" And he would nod, because it was easier than explaining that without the school, he felt as if his voice had been taken from him. One day, while cleaning the attic, he came across a box of old notebooks. Student work. Essays written in uneven handwriting. Thoughts, naive and honest. He sat down on the floor and began reading. One boy wrote that he was afraid of becoming like his father. A girl wrote that she wanted to run away from town and never return. Some wrote about love, some about anger, some about emptiness. Walter realized he remembered their faces. Almost all of them. Especially one. His name was Daniel Carter. A quiet boy with a gaze always slightly apart. He never argued, never joked, but he wrote as if every word were a heavy stone. Walter had once given him a high grade and written in the margins, "You think deeper than you realize." After school, Daniel disappeared. Like hundreds of others. Walter often wondered, had he done enough? Said enough? Did he have the right to stay silent when he saw pain but didn't know how to help? The following week, he went to the city library. Not as a reader. As someone seeking connection. He offered to host free meetings, readings, conversations, just listening. The librarian was surprised but agreed. 2 people came to the first meeting. 3 to the second. Within a month, there were 10. Mostly teenagers and young adults. Those who didn't know where to take their thoughts. Walter didn't give lectures. He simply asked questions. The same ones he had once been afraid to ask in class because there were no right answers. One evening, after everyone had left, a man in his 30s approached. He stood uncertainly, as if about to leave, but something held him back. "You don't remember me, do you?" he said. "I'm not good with names," Walter admitted. "Daniel Carter." The world seemed to stop. Walter looked at him and saw both the boy from the back row and the grown man, tired in his eyes. "You once wrote me one line," Daniel said. "I carried it with me for years. I didn't always believe it. But it kept me from disappearing." Walter found no words. He felt as if he had always spoken too much, and too little at the same time. They sat together until closing. Talking about choices, about losses, about how easy it is to get lost even when you try to do everything right. That night, Walter returned home not feeling alone. He realized a simple truth: a teacher doesn't stop being a teacher when the classroom door closes. They stop only when they stop listening. The next morning, he woke early again. But this time, the silence did not weigh on him. It was waiting. His story wasn't one of great success. It was a story of presence. And perhaps that was enough for someone, someday. Walter began to notice that the days were taking shape again. Not just mornings and evenings, but something in between, expectation. He wasn't waiting for events. He was waiting for people. Their voices. Questions that had no quick answers. The library meetings became regular. Some came once and never returned. Some stayed. Walter never felt offended. He knew that sometimes one evening is enough for a person to realize they are not alone. After that, it was their path. Daniel came often. He was no longer the quiet boy, but the shadow of the past lived within him. He worked at a warehouse, had a family, but felt as though he had betrayed himself. Once he had wanted to write. Then he had to survive. And survival leaves no room for words. "I keep thinking," he said one evening, "who I would have become if you had said something different. Or more. Or less." Walter was silent for a long time. "We all want someone to tell us the right words at the right time," he replied. "But sometimes the right words are the ones we remember later." That night, Walter took out an old notebook. He wasn't writing for anyone. He wrote because the silence could no longer fit inside him. He wrote about the school, about Elizabeth, about the students he remembered better than his own birthdays. He wrote about the fear of being useless, and the strange hope that appears when you expect nothing. His handwriting was uneven. Sentences were long. But they were honest. Months passed. The meetings grew. Someone brought a friend. Someone brought a sister. Some just sat and listened. Walter never called himself a teacher. He called himself a person who had once spoken too much and was now learning to listen. One day, the librarian cautiously asked if he wanted to do something bigger. A course. A program. A title. Walter smiled. Titles are for those who are sure they know where they are going, he said. I'm just going. But the world had its own plans. One of the visitors recorded one of the meetings on their phone. Not entirely. Just a few minutes. Where Walter spoke about mistakes, not as verdicts, but as traces of the path. The video appeared online. Unedited. No music. Just an old man and the pauses between his words. Thousands of people watched. Walter found out about it by accident. Daniel showed him, a little awkwardly, as if it were forbidden. People are leaving comments, he said. They say you say things no one has ever told them. Walter stared at the screen for a long time. He did not recognize himself. Not because the image was different, but because, for the first time, he saw himself through the eyes of people he had never met. Messages began to arrive. Letters. Long, short. With thanks. With questions. With stories. He read them slowly. Not all at once. Because every word had weight. He didn't become famous. He didn't become popular in the usual sense. But he became needed. And that was more frightening than loneliness. Because now, silence had meaning again. Walter realized, at 67, life doesn't start over. It just removes the unnecessary. And leaves what truly belongs to you. And he was ready to carry it forward. Slowly. Honestly. For as long as his voice would allow. The more people learned about Walter, the more he felt a strange resistance within himself. Not fear of a stage, there was no stage. Fear of responsibility. Because every letter, every message contained an unspoken request. Say something that will help me survive another day. Walter did not believe in grand words. He believed in honest pauses. He did not answer everyone. But every reply he wrote as if it were his last. Sometimes just a few sentences. Sometimes a whole page. Never advice. Only questions that a person could carry with them. His house gradually stopped feeling empty. Letters lay on the table. Notebooks on the windowsill. In the corner, a box of books he had started rereading, but differently now. Not as a teacher. As a witness. One day he received a letter with no return address. Neat handwriting, slightly trembling letters. The writer wrote that once they sat in a car, not knowing where to go. They turned on a random video, and heard Walter's voice. No promises. No solutions. Just the thought that a person is not their worst day. Walter held that letter in his hands for a long time. Then carefully folded it and placed it in a drawer, where he kept things that did not require a response. He began venturing beyond the library. He was invited to small community centers, church halls, even schools, not to teach, but just to be. He always arrived early. Saturday. Looked at the empty chairs. Remembered how he once feared full classrooms. Now he feared only one thing, saying something dishonest. Sometimes, after the meetings, young teachers approached him. They asked how not to burn out. How not to lose purpose. How to survive when it feels like no one is listening. Walter smiled sadly. They are listening, he said. Just not always when you speak. At home, he often spoke aloud to Elizabeth. Not as before, with pain. But with presence. He told her about the people he met. About how the world still breaks, but no longer as completely as it once seemed. Sometimes, at night, he woke thinking he had wasted too much time. That he could have been braver. Louder. Done more. Then morning came. And with it, letters. Names. Living stories. He began writing a book. Not as an author. As a person who collects voices into one quiet space. Without structure. Without a plan. Just as life allowed. Daniel helped him. Type the texts. Read them aloud. Sometimes cried. Sometimes laughed, amazed that he had once feared these words. You gave me not direction, he said one day. You gave me permission. Walter said nothing. He knew, some things do not need words. His health began to remind him quietly, but insistently. His heart grew weary faster, his steps slower. But his mind was clearer. He stopped hurrying. Because he realized, he had already made it. One autumn evening, when leaves covered the road, Walter sat by the window again. Now he didn't look at the world as something distant. He looked at it as a conversation that continues. And he still had something to say. Not loudly, but enough. Walter felt the approach of the end, not as a threat, but as a change in the light. The days grew shorter, his strength selective, yet inside, everything was strangely clear. He no longer woke up asking, "Why?" The question had disappeared, leaving only the answer that needed no words. He finished the manuscript on the day the first snow fell on the porch. He put the final period and sat for a long time, staring at it as if it were not a period, but a window. Then he carefully closed the notebook and signed it, not with his name, but with the date. It seemed right not to tie the words to himself. Let them go on their own. Daniel came that evening. He brought soup and news. The manuscript had been accepted for a small print run. No advertising. No loud promises. Just a book that would find those who needed it. "Are you happy?" he asked. Walter thought. "I am at peace," he said. "That is enough." That night he spoke to Elizabeth longer than usual. He thanked her for patience, for silence, for teaching him to be present even when you can't change anything. He asked for nothing. He simply allowed memory to be gentle. The following weeks passed slowly. People came. Sat nearby. Sometimes they remained silent together. Walter rarely left home anymore, but the house did not feel like a cage. It became a place of gathering, not of bodies, but of stories. One morning, he woke earlier than usual. The world was quiet, as if waiting. Walter stood, approached the window, and saw the sunlight touching the snow. He thought it a fine day to say nothing at all. He sat in his chair, hands on the armrests, and closed his eyes. Not out of fatigue. Out of trust. When they found him, the house was full of light. The notebook lay on the table. In the window, the morning. No rush, no words left unsaid. The book was published in spring. People read it slowly. They passed it hand to hand. Highlighted passages with pencil. Some found courage in it. Some found silence. Some found permission to be imperfect. On the last page, there were no conclusions. Only the line Walter had once written in the margin of a student's notebook, now left for everyone. "You think deeper than you realize." And that was enough.